Welcome. We are going to get started here, and I'm going to do a quick introduction of my guest. We are a couple of minutes early, but because we're just going to go ahead and get started so we can spend most of the time just talking. Um, and for those of you who will be joining and who are listening to the simulcast or on the desktop, just know that there will also be a replay. So if you come in the middle, there'll be a replay, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we come in. So hopefully, if you're new to Fireside, you're able to get in, get on. If you have a question, all you have to do is go into the emojis and raise your hand, make a comment, request to be on stage. And one of the ways you do that is in the circle at the bottom right that has the three dots. There will be a note that says request to speak. So you'll be able to do that and jump on stage. So I am going to welcome you first to Alignment Vision Action here on Fireside. My name is Laurel Rutledge. I am the host of your show. I am your Chief Navigation Officer and run LKR Group LLC, and have also the Rutledge Perspective podcast and the Rutledge Perspective radio show here live in Houston, Texas. And Alignment Vision Action here on Fireside on this platform is something that is near and dear to my heart, having some really fantastic guests and doing some really great conversations here as well. And I am so fortunate today to have with me Dr. Nikki Lanier, and she is the CEO of Harper, Slade, which is one of the fastest growing and most highly recognized racial equity advisory firms in the country. And I met her through another organization. She came to speak with us, and she was just so powerful that I wanted to have her on Fireside and get a chance to have a conversation with her. And as you jump in to the show and ask your questions, there's just so much here. I just cannot wait for you to hear her. So, Nikki, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Laurel, thank you for the opportunity. I'm so excited to chat it up with you, and just super excited. This is my first time on this platform, like this whole Fireside deal. And so I'm loving it already.
Yeah, it is so cool. It's so cool. And so as we have people jump in, because we're at noon on Thursday, April the 20th, we'll have people jump in and out. So we're going to keep going. And as they come in, we'll welcome them, and then we'll put the replay up so people can see it. So here's where I'd like to start. So you are a racial equity strategist. Tell people what that means. And then we're going to jump back into your journey.
Yeah. So here's how I define racial equity. It is proportional fairness that takes into consideration the cultural and historic realities that have beset people of color as distinct from all other people, and works to remedy the same. Three really significant components to this definition, Laurel. First is proportional fairness, which is not fair. It's proportional fair, right? So it's not entirely fairness in the way that we've come to understand sameness means fairness, right? And it is dependent on an understanding of what culturally and historically has happened to people of color, what policies have uniquely beset us, what are what's the residue that flows from that, those policies, and then what kind of behavioral norms are uniquely ours that we experience that are limiting to the choices in terms of what we're able to avail ourselves of. And third part, it works to remedy all of it. So as a strategist, I help organizations, individual by individual, and in some cases, even in the community level, understand how to dissect, build momentum around, unpack, interrogate, more deeply understand their role in effectuating racial equity at the macro and micro level. That's what I do.
So you know what? I was already in. So we were already nerding out when she was on this other organization. I'm like, let's just do this.
So much.
Okay.
I know.
So here's the thing. I think that's important about what you just said too, that I want people who are listening, who are tuning in on YouTube, who are going to be listening to the replay. I want you to hear this. Equity does not equal the same, right? I always told my clients, it's about being consistent, right? Everybody, it's like, we're not trying to be participation trophy people. That's not what this is, right? Everybody doesn't get a car. It is, some people might get a Toyota. Some people might get a Tesla. Some people might get a truck. Some people might get a vacation, right? But the recognition is that everybody gets something, but that something may be different. It's about equity, right? Not equality or sameness. I love that.
So true.
Talk a little bit about, now that you've given us kind of what this is in this space that you're doing, take us back a little bit. How did you get into this work?
God, really.
Yes.
I mean, honestly, so okay, so I come from a family, I come from a lineage of
Hmm.
leaders who are very stalwart and flat-footed in insisting on presumptive humanity designations for Black people. So my
Yes.
grandmothers were involved in what they called Negro rights work in their day. My parents were very involved in the civil rights movement. My mother worked more with NAACP. My father was probably more violently involved, having worked with
Hmm.
this organization called SNCC, Student Nonviolent
Yes.
Coordinating Committee, when he was in college. And so my
Hmm.
dad, like his job while he was with SNCC was to register Black folks to vote. And for that
Hmm.
crime, that infraction, he has been jailed and hosed and spat upon and shot after
Hmm.
and escaped 2 lynching attempts in his home
Wow.
country, right? And so as an only
Mm.
child, that's what I heard growing up. Like I'm was
Hmm.
super tethered then and very tethered even today to my parents.
Hmm.
Like I long for and hunger for their musings and their life stories. And so that's really what I heard. Grew up in a family that was very rooted around the plight of Black America and the beauty of Black people and the potency of Black people and the richness of our heritage.
Hmm.
And so that's what incubated me as a matter of rearing. And then you lay on top of that my academic stuff. So I have a degree in
Yes.
journalism, which makes me talk like the way I do. I like to always like feel like I'm on stage. So this is great.
Right.
So this degree, and plus I'm a Leo, so there's a little bit of that going on.
There you go.
Um, it's a mess. But then,
Right.
so then I practiced law. So I have a law degree. So I
Hmm.
did labor and employment law for several years. And then I worked in HR for years and years and years. And then, of course, I work for the Federal Reserve. We can talk about that more later in
Hmm.
macroeconomics. And so I've got that academic and professional steeping married with this kind of familial heritage around the plight
Yeah.
of Black folks. And I'm also like super driven around the urgency of the demography that's in front of us. So that's all
Yes.
that kind of gives rise to how I practice in this space.
Hmm. I love that. And welcome to the show, Anthony. He has a fantastic show, he and his wife. I'm right. I'm right. It's really good. So
Oh,
you have a
okay.
TV and
Hey,
a show as
Anthony. I
well.
don't know. Yeah,
Um,
I want to hear more about that.
right. Yeah, it's really good. So here's the thing. One of the things that has come up lately, because we all know the situation that we're in right now, that especially those of us who live in this skin know that this stuff is not new. Hello, Jade. Welcome to the show. We know this stuff is not new. All these things that have started to transpire again are not new.
Right.
There was just a period of time, probably a few decades, where it just wasn't good, mature, adult behavior to let all this stuff be as public as it is now. Now, in the 60s, of course, like you said, with SNCC and everything, folks are acting out. But for those of us who grew up in this skin, this is not new. And yet, and yet, it is when we talk about equity and making changes and true um, changes to business, right? And ensuring that people understand that it is not pie. When
Yeah.
someone else gets an opportunity, that doesn't mean your opportunity goes away. Talk a little bit about how, when you see this space of equity and racial equity and making an impact on ensuring that we are doing what we can to address, overcome, work within, around, over, under these systemic things that we put in place or that have been put in place. What are kind of the key first steps that you tell people in positions of power and making decisions that they need to address to really get at true equity in their spaces?
Oh my gosh, so many things in terms of what has to be a part of the context setting.
Mm-hmm.
Let me first say this. I think part of the reason why we don't see the traction that we want in D and E and I work
Mm-hmm.
is because we don't sit it inside of a context that is mobilizing and
Mm-hmm.
that appropriately um, casts the plight, right? So the plight. So we sit it inside of right thing to do or social justice
Mm-hmm.
or what's a sense of desiring to be good people. We sit it inside of
Mm-hmm.
that. Those norms can't activate with permanency inside of capitalist systems. They're just not built. Like capital isn't built to
Right.
respond to a social norm or social
Mm-hmm.
justice or a right. What are you
Mm-hmm.
talking about? Right thing to do. They're built
Right.
to respond to different economic levers. And so that's one of the things that we talk with our clients a lot about is where do we sit this thinking? Where does this doctrine reside, both in terms of
Mm-hmm.
the strategic framework of the organization, but also in your heart and mind? The second thing is recognizing that the work is by de facto disruptive and that it
Yes.
is counterintuitive. So this idea, if we're honest, Laurel, the idea
Mm-hmm.
of Black people specifically
Yeah.
being presumed fully human all the
Yes.
time, no
Mm.
matter the context, without caveat, without question, and having full access to what being a full human means,
Yes.
that has never happened, right? So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
we don't have a black or white. Nobody has a framework for what that looks like. Even those that desire it, white people too, like who really desire,
Mm-hmm.
don't know what we're talking about when we say that. We've never seen it. So we got to
Right.
understand that what we are looking to do is inertia resetting. The inertia of
Yes.
our country leans toward muting and marginalization and stunting and diminishing the
Yes.
humanity of darker people. And so
Mm-hmm.
DEI work every single day works against an inertia. So that's why
Yes.
it can't start with, well, let's do a program or a thing or hire
Yeah.
somebody or have a, wear your heritage to work day. Like those
Right.
are kind of the perfunctory demonstrations
Mm-hmm.
of a desire to do something. But what this
Mm-hmm.
now requires, I would argue, at this dispensation in time, is not just about what we are doing, but who we are being must fundamentally be recast. Basic human to
Mm-hmm.
human engagements and the presumptions around humanity and choice
Yes.
letting, and access to choice and access to the fulsome
Right.
realities of our constitutional provisions, can no longer be doled out as as the folks on high determine it to be palatable.
Right.
So that's like
Right.
the work that I talk. So I don't talk about like, okay, so we need to hire this many Black folk and this many Hispanic folks, or we need to
Mm-mm.
do this training or do this activity. I never start
Mm-hmm.
there. I always start with,
Right.
so let's unpack what you fundamentally believe about people who are
Yes.
darker. We got to spend time, like
Yes.
months, spend time
Yes.
unpacking
Well, and
that.
and and what's so interesting about that is, we I have some really good friends who are in the DNI space, and one in particular who, you find people, because here's the other thing when you talk about those systems, right? And the perfunctory work is all of a sudden there was this explosion of DE&I, but when you put people in DEI who have no real training, no
Yep.
real understanding, no real experience, because there's real work, there's real
Yeah.
science, there's real knowledge behind that space, right? It's just like hiring a bunch of Black people who aren't qualified and then saying, oh, see, we tried, they just didn't work. Well, you didn't really try. You just hired a
Yeah.
bunch of people who didn't look like you. And so when we talk about this space and about doing this work and it not being perfunctory and having people understand that, because it irritates me that now all of a sudden we got to add a B, right? We got to add belonging, because heaven forbid we like actually do the work that we need to do and what we're doing now. It's not about that D. It's not about that diversity, right? When I hear you talk about let's unpack the real issues there, it is truly about the undergirding of inclusion, because that's the hard work. The D is easy. I can go hire a bunch of people who are different genders, different looks, different languages, different countries. That's easy. I can go find them, right?
Yep.
Even equity, money's easy. Job titles are easy. I can in a heartbeat change that stuff, right? Because that's just a decision. But that inclusion gets at who I am fundamentally. That
Yeah.
gets at what I believe fundamentally. And so when you talk about starting to unpack that and really moving organizations forward so that it's not just about let's have a conversation and try to be nice to people or be understanding after a George Floyd situation, or let's try to make sure that we create safe spaces after, a big issue. When you are trying to truly deep seed it in an organization and starting to unpack, where are you finding the biggest and the deepest hurdles that you're having to overcome, that maybe we as Black people, not in the role of having to educate others, but in the role of supporting the unpacking? Where are you finding the biggest challenges, the biggest hurdles?
Lord. Oh.
If you can pick one
Woo,
or two
girl.
or
So
400.
couple things. Let me just, and I'm doing a little bit of extemporaneous kind of stream of consciousness, so forgive me. Um Challenges and hurdles. One is the underestimating of what is being asked of us as we are embracing each of these letters, DEI. Two,
Mm-hmm.
the presumption that they are all one thing, that D and E and
Yeah.
I are all one thing, to be
Yeah.
resourced the same, to be to have capability built in furtherance of it in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
I argue that D and E and I are all paced in sequence. They all very, very, very different doctrines. They are very different on the maturity curve of an organization,
Mm-hmm.
and could very well reside in various places inside of an organization,
Right.
just depending on where folks land. Um, I also, the demand following George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. I live in Louisville,
Mm-hmm.
Kentucky, so Breonna is
Yeah.
particularly acute for us here.
Yes.
And Ahmaud Arbery, the demand of 2022. Well, what that created was a demand for DEI that outpaced the desire for it,
Yes.
and
Oh, that's good.
the maturity and the sophistication to understand what exactly was being embarked upon, so
Yes.
that companies, believing themselves to be well intended,
Mm-hmm.
started grabbing Black and brown folks like crazy out of the ether, plucking them into
Yes.
these senior VP of diversity, whatnot, right?
Yep.
Here goes a couple $1,000, fix everything. What aside from like the budget outlay, and like sometimes
Right.
they didn't feel a whole bunch of support, let me tell you what else happened with that. If for the first time an organization had a leader of color
Mm-hmm.
in an inaugural DEI role, two things are possibly going wrong here.
Okay.
One, in the spirit of trying to do what's right, which is crazy. Those two
Yep.
things are this. One, you've got a person, a darker leader that this
Mm-hmm.
organization has never had to hear from the position of authority. You've got
Right.
authority being extended through a Black and brown mouth, which comes from a narrative, an
Mm-hmm.
assigned narrative that many white people have been taught, and all of us really, is a deficit narrative. So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm already in this company not accustomed to looking up and seeing Black or brown, and Black or brown is espousing stuff that benefits Black and brown, now both this leader and the doctrine that they're espousing are like foreign and
Yes.
hostile. So not only do I not understand you being up in here, I don't understand what you're talking about, right?
Right.
And there's no protection for that. There's no
Mm-hmm.
understanding of how to provide cover for that from the board of directors or from the CEO who might have placed that person. So those are some of
Mm-hmm.
the things that I see kind of going wrong that give rise to this larger system of ineffectual DEI
Mm-hmm.
promulgation, because we're not quite sure what we're asking for. We're not quite sure what people must be willing to unpack inside of themselves in order to make this work. We're bringing in people for whom the environment is already inhospitable. I mean, there's already a
Yes.
reason why you haven't had Black or brown people in leadership before,
Right.
and that's
Right.
largely environmental, and it's largely belief systems that have never been checked or talked about, but they're
Mm-hmm.
alive. And so now they are actively working against, quietly but
Yes.
actively and insidiously working against both that leader and what they're espousing in the
Yes.
organization. So I think like all of that kind of stuff is what's gone terribly wrong, terribly wrong.
Yes. I agree. I agree. And welcome, Miguel, to the show. We are talking to Dr. Nikki Lanier, who is a racial equity strategist, and really just trying to unpack some stuff that's just deeply packed for generations, generations.
Yeah, yeah.
And I want to shift a little bit to this idea that I heard of you that really, when you spoke with us, that really grabbed my attention because I'd read a couple of things. The first thing I read was an article about a woman, and she did a post about an experience she had on an airplane where she got on the airplane. She happened to be a woman of color. I believe she identified herself as East Asian, maybe. And she got on a plane, and the man sitting next to her was reading an article that was about DE&I, and it was one of those articles that was kind of anti-wokeism, those kind of things, one of those appropriated articles. And as she sat down, they started engaging, and he asked her what she did, and she's like, "I do that you're reading, right?" And
Right.
she said the guy actually put down the paper, right, folded the paper, and wanted to
Wow.
have a conversation, which I thought was actually really good. Wanted to have a conversation, and the crux of her blog was, she had to meet him where he was and talk in his language. So this was a CEO. And so there were things that she said, like, this is not about just hiring more people. And his immediate response was, yeah, that's a quota. She's like, no, it's not a quota. She said, but here's the thing. If you think about really trying to be diverse, and you look at your organization, you look at your environment, and there's 50% black people in your community, you look at your company, and there's 30%, okay, overall. And then at the bottom of that 30%, 80% of them are there. And then when you get up to the next level, of those 20%, 80% of those stay long enough to get to the next level. So by the time someone gets to the very top, you only have maybe 1% of the people in the beginning of your organization or even available, because there's been something happening throughout the organization. And so having that conversation with him about the numbers kind of got his attention. The next thing I read was someone who said, you know what, I got this troll who is like, why don't black people just pull up themselves by the bootstraps and blah, 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 right? And his response was masterful, because he said, you know what, but here's the thing, we did. If you think about what happened right after the Civil War, right after slavery was abolished, there was, Black Wall Street. There was Tulsa, right? There was all of these places where black people were thriving. We were getting elected to places. We were running things. We had stores, we had schools, we had all of these things until plantation owners realized, we brought all them over here. Now there's more of them than us. We got to find a way to make sure that they don't take over, right? And so then you started getting all these institutional kind of things of indentured servitude and stuff that we couldn't battle. And so when you were exactly, and so when you started talking to us about the numbers and economics and this time you had at the Federal Reserve, right, and meeting people where they are, not giving them a pass, but understanding where they are in order to make a significant impact in this inertia. Talk a little bit about that journey of facts, or that book of facts around this whole kind of diversity and inclusion piece from an economic and going concern perspective for business.
Yeah, it is unimpeachable data, an unimpeachable fact that the country is browning. We are becoming blacker and browner, not whiter.
Right.
And it is also undeniable that it is impossible to sustain a civilized society with the majority of its citizens only knowing exemptions from the fundamentals of how the economy works. 2045 is a year that we've probably all heard that by then, Black people and Hispanic people specifically will make up the majority in the available workforce. Since policy makers, i.e. fiscal policy, Congress, monetary policy, Federal Reserve, have been thinking through policy making in modern day, one of the first inquiries that's explored is, how is the middle class doing, right?
Yes.
So I know from my days with the Federal Reserve, we would look at, in terms of thinking about monetary policy, like interest rates up or down, yay or nay, how are we going to advise our bank presidents on how to vote at the FOMC meeting? The question always was, okay, first place we're looking is what's happening in middle class, what's happening with saving and spending, what's happening with consumption, with higher education rates, home ownership, all the things that are indicators of like, oh, so there's healthier is not so healthy. Because we
Right.
know that where the middle class goes, i.e., median income earners, usually that's where the rest of you can have some indication of how the economy performs. We
Mm-hmm.
have always had, as a country, white people buoying the sustenance of the middle class.
Mm-hmm.
They are, in many ways, the most unencumbered group of people to enter into any economic strata. That's not to say there aren't
Mm-hmm.
encumbrances. So before your
Right.
callers start tripping about that, that's not what I'm saying.
Right.
What I'm saying is, in terms of systemic, race based, policy rooted
Mm-hmm.
encumbrances that
Mm-hmm.
prohibit or limit your ability to move with economic vibrancy, white people have by and large not had to face that in the way that every other race has,
Mm-hmm.
especially Black folks and
Mm-hmm.
especially Hispanic folks. So when we think about 2045 will be majority minority in the available workforce, and we
Mm-hmm.
know that whomever is the majority in the available workforce must also be well represented in the middle class in order for fiscal policy like theories and formulas to work and monetary policy theories and formulas to work. It
Yeah.
begs it not begs the question. It requires the accelerated amplification of Black people and Hispanic people into the middle class right
Mm-hmm.
now.
Now.
This is just 22 years away. And
Yes.
so, why I say that there's urgency around this, Laurel, is because we know, and this is not the world according to Nikki, this is the world according to theorists, academics, and folks who are well studied in this area,
Mm-hmm.
i.e., Federal Reserve and larger
Right.
uh, consulting institutions. We know
Mm-hmm.
that the biggest encumbrance, the biggest impediment, really, for Black people and Hispanic people to enter into the middle class is the way that we experience racism at work.
Yes.
Hands down, that is it.
Yes.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and because so much of the way we uniquely experience performance reviews, the way we
Mm-hmm.
experience opportunities to grow and to be developed, exposure opportunities to leaders who can make decisions on how and when our income is going to be increased,
Right.
um, all the raises from all those things are filtered through the lens of bias and
Mm-hmm.
prejudice that we can't talk about at work because it's
Right.
just been historically too difficult. Um, that has been the largest impediment to us moving into. So it is in white America's interest that Black and Brown America thrive. And so for that reason, that's why I focus my work on my firm on racial equity,
Mm-hmm.
because it is the
Mm-hmm.
remediation. It's not just stopping the bleeding of racism, it's treating the
Right.
now infected wound that it has left so that we
Yes.
all win, right? We all,
Yes.
it is really white people have got to be leaning into this work, not as an indictment of their whiteness or as
Right.
a declaration of their being horrible people, because the
Right.
reality is we've all inherited racism. Like we didn't, nobody here created this
Yes.
thing. Nobody here created it. We all
Mm-hmm.
inherited it. And
Yes.
if we're not working against it every single day, then we're feeding it. Like there's no
Yes.
neutral. You're either feeding it or working against it. If you're doing
Yes.
nothing, then you're feeding it. So
Yes.
that's what we've inherited. That's all we know. That's all
Mm.
we know. So that's why I approach it like with grace. Like I'm not mad at white people. I'm not super like I don't see them as the villain or as the
Right.
enemy in this. I see racism
Right.
as the enemy. It is an ideological
Yes.
enemy. And for that reason, because it is taken from all of us, white people
Mm-hmm.
included, not as
Mm-hmm.
acutely, clearly, but
Right.
I mean, they get smacked around by racism too, or the
Yes.
impact or the effects of it. So we
Mm-hmm.
all got a right to be mad at it equally.
Yep.
We all got a right to and an obligation to remediate it, right? But we first got to
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge it. And we also have to understand that a bunch of fairness now, equality, is not going to disrupt inequality. You
Right.
have to look at there's no way to remediate years of unfairness
Right.
except for more years of unfairness.
Right. Well, and that's so. God, oh, this is just so deep. This is just so deep. So here's the thing. I don't. It's like I don't even know which question to ask next. So here's the deal. If you think about that, right? This is years of institutions, policies, practices that are built built to
Yeah,
be exclusive, not inclusive, built
yeah,
to be that way, right? When you talk about gentrification, when you talk about redlining, when you talk about what happened with housing after after World War II,
World War
right? With
II,
all of
yep.
the GI Bills, when you talk about all of that, and yet on the other side of that coin, you've got Black women being the most highly educated people in the US, right? The most highly educated. You've got women in general becoming, having the highest percentage. I think it's 51 to 60%. I've seen it kind of waffle, of new startups, right? Of entrepreneurship. And yet, so we've got these things where people are saying, you know, corporate isn't, it just isn't working, right? All of these senior level women are choosing to exit at their senior level roles, right? It's not working, so we're getting out. So if you play out 2045 and lay on top of that the real challenges to corporate institutions that have an inability to do the hard work to upend those institutionally challenging things that are directly in the DNA, what happens? Right? So we've got this new population that's going to be the biggest percentage of the workforce, but how do you keep a GE, a Tesla, an Apple, right? A Google, an Amazon, if people are saying, you know what, I'm just not. I'm just not
I'm just
gonna.
not,
I'm
yeah,
just not
yeah.
gonna, and I don't have to anymore. I can do my own thing. So when you think about the research that you've done and the opportunities outside of those institutions that have all of this madness inside of them, and people are saying my energy is better used to build something than to fix something. How do we marry all of that
Yeah.
from your
Well,
perspective?
it's so complex. It's so ridiculously complex. And here's what I know.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line, Laurel, in this current economic climate, in this inflationary period,
Mm-hmm.
middle class is anywhere between like 60 to $120,000
Mm-hmm.
income earner.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of income is typically realized inside of a workforce. You're
Yes.
working for someone, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
that's what we need at the bare
Yes.
minimum in terms of more Black and Hispanic households earning in that range, which
Mm-hmm.
means that for those that choose to play that out in a workplace, that workplace has got to be far more hospitable, celebratory of, embracing of, and activating of Black and brown talent. It's got to start exercising those muscles right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
However, it is also true that we could look at that income level of income earning and way more as entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always thought of, and still do, think of entrepreneurial work as almost the wealth building play, which clearly we
Mm-hmm.
need more Black and Hispanic wealth, right, built.
Mm-hmm.
And that will
Mm-hmm.
also help the economy. That will help with the argument on how do we like at least move us through middle class, because you could still,
Right.
right? But it doesn't negate the fact that in the end, and I would say that we need to still work on teasing this out in work, how
Mm-hmm.
workplaces feel.
Mm-hmm.
How does a workplace feel about me? And how do I feel about it? And what is activated in me because of that
Right.
feeling is core, not just to the economic output that benefits that company, that benefits me, that
Mm-hmm.
benefits the country moving forward,
Right.
but it's core to how I can show up as an engaged employee. It's core to
Right.
your retention bottom line. It is core to your innovation matrix and methodology company. It is core to how you can think about the fundamentals of your organizational effectiveness strategies, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
will be the case that no matter what happens, the workforce that we have to pull from will become blacker and browner henceforth.
Yes.
So if
Mm-hmm.
you company are looking to employ anybody for anything this point forward,
Yes.
you've got to figure out and understand that as we think about from a futurist standpoint, the workforce of the
Mm-hmm.
future, it is not going to
Mm-hmm.
be as white as it has as we've become accustomed. In fact, it's going
Right.
to be much, much darker. And it can't
Mm-hmm.
just be that we just bring in darker into social norms and rituals and
Right.
cadences that never contemplated Black and brown to begin with. But what has to
Mm-hmm.
happen is that you've got to learn how to cultivate an environment where Black and brown talent can thrive. And that is the work that we do at Harper Slade. Shameless
Mm-hmm.
plug.
Right. Well, and it's so interesting because, at the end of the day, one of the things that I am adamant about doing, and if it doesn't get done, it will not be for lack of effort. It'll just be because God said not quite yet. is truly to build a $100 million foundation that goes after three key pillars in K through 12 education, right? Because I believe, the way I was raised, I believe that every child, regardless of socioeconomic status, race, gender, what have you, is entitled to a
Yes.
stellar K through 12 education that is not hampered, trying to find nice words, right? That's not hampered by this madness like we're seeing from that person in Florida, right? That's not whitewashing being taking things out that just are true, right? That truly does build people up in that K through 12 area to learn how to think, to learn how to process data.
Yep.
That's not taking away libraries, right? The place of knowledge. That's the first thing you do when you're trying to decimate a people is to take away knowledge, right? Take away
Yep.
information. And so, for me, that is one of the things that is just my whole spirit is just saying this has to be done because everybody's entitled to that. And yet, when I think about the education system, when I think about housing, when I think about access to capital, when I think about how many organizations I was in where I watched leaders who looked like me, because I was one of only two senior executive Black women in a global company of 17,000. 17,000. There were two of us, right? When I see that and the kind of roles that we get that are cleanup woman roles with no budget, right? All the people that they've been trying to get rid of for 30 years, and all of a sudden you're supposed to fix it. Those deep seated institutional quagmires of crap
Yep.
that just say, you know what? We can't fix this. This we need to just blow up and start over. How do you, in this area of racial equity, and this is probably more of a personal question than a factual question, how do you continue to have that energy to say, we have to keep working to remedy because we can't start over everywhere, right? We have to keep working to remedy. And here's how I get the energy to keep working on remedy as opposed to, you know what, forget it. We're going to move over here to folks who are really ready.
Going back to my answer before, it's God. I see this work as ministry, and it was passed to me in utero. I see this as a part of my familial responsibility, and I'm honored to carry it. Honestly, as beleaguered as I am sometimes under it, because I am both the doctor and the patient for a living.
Yes.
And I'm not unscathed by the messages and the vicissitudes of the way racism shows up, even in the context of me going out and talking to my clients about it and what I must,
Yes.
the daggers that I have to manage. So I'm not exempt from any of that, but I'm not beholden to it. Like, so my calling is much higher
Yeah.
than what is happening. What I'm seeing happening, I have a different reality of what God's promise is for me in the way that I effectuate this work, and my responsibility and obligation from both him and, quite frankly, even my parents are super excited about me carrying it on in this way. But I also am informed so much by grace. Like I'm probably more patient than I need to be, maybe in some of these instances, but I guess I can't. I try to understand. Listen, this is, and I'm not trying to be arrogant about it, but I believe that I'm uniquely
Right.
positioned to talk about this in ways that many aren't, for all of the reasons that we talked about at the top of the call. But one thing that I'm
Right.
not quite sure we've ever tried, as much as we would say, well, we've been at this for such a long time, it's not going to, yeah, but I don't know that we've actually tried to deal with the issue behind the issue. And that's what I want to at least take a stab at with whatever life I have left to draw professionally. And so it's this. So follow this analogy with me, Laurel, and this is going to be super crude, but bear with me. So if you think about
Yeah.
like my hands as soil, right? So this is the soil layer. From this soil called America
Yeah.
sprang a flower. I wouldn't even call it, because flowers are pretty. A weed called racism. And that
Yes.
racism blossomed as slavery and Jim Crow and sharecropping, and you can't do anything with the GI Bill, and you can't
Right.
vote, and lynching, and separate but equal, right? So it sprang up from that soil, sprang all of these things. And then law came along and said, can't do that, stop it, right?
Yeah.
So all that got washed away, the
Mm-hmm.
soil stayed the same, and then it
Yeah.
sprang, um, segregation and access to capital issues or
Mm-hmm.
unfair treatment in work, or you still can't really vote, at least not in an
Mm-hmm.
unfettered way, or
Right.
no water in Flint, or food
Mm-hmm.
deserts in Black communities, right? So it sprang from that. So now we've got a bunch of, in some cases, law, some cases, nonprofits, somebody trying
Mm-hmm.
to bat that away.
Right.
But the soil
Mm.
still says Black people are not equally human.
Yeah.
You just aren't. So it's not
That's
like
good.
it's deeper than like we don't see you as equal or
Mm-hmm.
we're prejudiced or we think you are inferior. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
deeper. Dating
Yeah.
again back to a narrative that was assigned years and years ago that we've inherited
Mm-hmm.
that says fundamentally Black people are not human. And the reason why I land there is because we think about like the founders, 1776, the founders of the Constitution,
Right.
we were never included in the we. We were
Right.
3/5 of a human. Like this, it wasn't even like
Mm-hmm.
so you can't. I don't know that as a human being you can actually move forward with how venomous and horrible slavery was with a
Right.
group of people and see them as human beings. I don't think you could do that. Your psyche
Mm-hmm.
has to disassociate their humanity from what you're doing to
Right.
them. And
Right.
we've never dismantled that. So what we've done is try to bat away the manifestations of it. We've
Yes.
never dealt with the soil. I want to deal with
Right.
the soil. That's what I want to deal
That's
with. It's
good.
hard work, but that's where I'm not moving off of it.
That's so good. And that dehumanization and all of the things that have been found recently. I've been reading a lot these letters and documents and diaries that have been found from the European settlers who went to Africa, who talked about how incredible the Africans were and how amazing the country was and how many resources they had and how much knowledge they had and how we can't let them know how great they are. We can't let them understand how amazing this is, right? And even coming to this soil, right? And our indigenous people here, the amazing Native Americans here, and the things that they are doing and they did, and welcoming people, right, to support. And the same on the African continent, right? Welcoming people to support, not thinking of this nefarious potential, right? But being a people that was welcoming and wanting people to show
Right.
up. It is such a testament, I think, to a word that I hate because it's gotten to be such a bludgeoning instrument, but a testament to resilience, a testament to strength, right? A testament to deep seated knowledge and capability, and truly that ancestral strain, right, of strength and
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah.
But it's also not but full stop, a testament to that ancestral knowledge. And it can be such a heavy burden to carry if
Yeah.
one allows oneself to feel like you have to be the educator of the world, right?
Yep.
You have to tell everybody else and help them get over their stuff. And you're not responsible. So if you're listening, you are not responsible for helping somebody else figure out their own stuff. You're just not. You're just not. People need to do the work. And then we can have the conversation from a place of doing work. But we are not individually, as Black and brown people and as indigenous people, responsible for educating everybody else, right? One, it's not possible, but two, it's not our role. It's not our role to challenge, absolutely. To hold up the mirror, absolutely. But to do the deep work, that needs to be done by all of us, right? Including the
Yeah.
folks that want to deny that there's work to be done.
Yeah.
So, and feel free, Anthony, Lab, I think that's what it is. Welcome to the show with Dr. Nikki Lanier, racial equity strategist. Miguel, feel free if you go to, because the platform is new, so I don't know if you guys have been on before, but if you go to a little, oh, yay, Anthony, come on up. I'm accepting your request. Come on up to the stage. If you go to the little round button in the dark on the right hand side that has three little dots, if you click on that, you can get a request that says request to speak, and then I'll see that pop up. Anthony, how are you?
I am
I think you can
doing,
unmute yourself. Yeah.
yeah, I'm unmuted. Yeah.
Yay!
I'm doing great. Great show, Laurel. Good to see
Thank
you
you.
again.
Good to see you too.
And Nikki, oh my gosh, you're like all in my head. Like just all in
It's
my
what I
head.
do, Anthony. It's what I do.
Yeah, yes, and you do it very well. Do it very well. So, but I'm right along with you. Just so you know, as Laurel said, my wife and I have a show. I'm right. I'm right. But I also have a show on Fireside, Poetic People Fighting Racism,
Ooh.
which
Mm-hmm.
was inspired actually by Isabel Wilkinson and the Cass book.
Oh,
Mm.
wow. Wow.
So
Yes.
I wrote a manuscript that specifically addresses racism in the caste system in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I'm with you, okay?
All right.
Everything you're saying is like on point. And I
Mm-hmm.
loved what you said about, either you're feeding the system that we're living in or you're working against it.
Yeah.
So I do my small part to work against it. So,
Yes.
Nikki, I do have a question for you
Okay.
because you're deep in it. You're deep in it with the corporate world and all of that. And I'm sure you know this as well as I do, probably better. So you go into all of these corporate environments, and you touched on it a little bit, and you teach them, or you how to go about it, in DEI. Now, here's the thing that I know, and again, you touched on it. You can go in there and you break everything down for it, for the situation and all that, and they say, yes, yes, we're going to do that. They implement all of these things. But after you're gone, they may implement everything, but behind closed doors, they're saying to each other, okay, what can we do to counteract what we just implemented? Because every time we move forward a little bit, they're going to think, how can we slow this progress down? How can we put a stop to what we've implemented to keep us in place, to keep Black people in place, and to keep white people in place in their place of power? So, in your work, how often have you seen a company that you wouldn't talk to, a corporation that you talk to, and they really, really did what they were supposed to, that you can really see some change, and not at the corporate level, at the employee level? How often do you see that really happens?
That's a good question.
Uh, yeah. So thanks for that. So I think let me push on the question a little bit, Anthony, or maybe the presumptions under the question. Only in that, in my experience with the clients that we've had thus far, um, we don't. This is going to sound crazy, but we don't really do a lot by way of implementing anything year one. My company's only been in existence for a year, so there's that. So the premise, though, the idea is, I want to understand, if you're going to say yes to a Harper Slade engagement, then we're going to spend time unpacking your belief systems around Black and Brown people at the leadership level, management level, people management level, like beliefs. So we do assessments called, one of them is called the DEI sentiment survey. We want to know the current sentiment alive and well right now among the employee base around each of these letters, and what they're framing, what their thinking is, so that we'll know how and where and when we need to contextualize this differently and talk about it differently and make the environment more malleable and ready for these DEI seeds to be planted at some point. We got to first till that ground, because there's no need trying to plant this stuff in hard soil. I want to know the condition of the soil. And we spend a lot of time on that first. So we do that at the individual level, and we do that at the organizational level through our assessments, through our conversations, through our convening, through my fireside chats that I do with clients, all the things to ripen them. Second thing is, I want to make sure that you are working this as a strategic resetting of the way that you are working work, not a crisis intervention that you're being called upon because of ESG commitments or some sort of external party, or you're worried about blah, 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 such that you need a program to implement in year one or day one so that you can kind of almost check a box, whatever. Like, we don't work with clients like that, not knowingly going in. Next thing is, this is also going to sound crazy, but I price aggressively. Like, my price point is such that it almost doesn't make sense for you to work with me, at least my firm, my company, and then decide that you're not going to do anything that we've talked through or explored and unpacked, because it's a significant waste of money and time. Gosh, what else? And then, we focus so much on, after we're kind of working through how do we get the ground more malleable and get these seeds ready to plant, we work together on what those seeds need to look like. So they're not my seeds, right? That I'm just like, here, you go do this, put in a little bit of this, put a little shake, stir, blah, blah, blah. You got a DEI plan. We don't operate like that. Again, because I'm not really interested in the programming of it. I'm more interested in the belief system resetting, because I want this work, Anthony, to transcend work. Like, I'm trying to reset how humans engage with one another. I just happen to be doing it in the workplace because that's where y'all at. And there's consequences to that from the economy, right? But everybody's at work at some point. So to the extent that you're all gathered there, that's where I'd like to show up, because there are real workforce and workplace implications, but there's larger human to human implications that I'm as interested, if not more interested in. So I don't know if any of that helps answer your question.
Oh, no, that helps a lot. It's all about changing minds, changing mindset. A lot of times I explain it as, look, there is something wrong when a white person can see me from 50 yards away and they've already made a decision of who I am. And it's the same in the workplace, in the corporate workplace. It doesn't matter. Even if they see your name, if you have a, quote, black sounding name, you're already judged. You're already in bad shape. And to go in with the attitude of, that's what I have to change. I have to change how the corporate world, the white world, sees black and brown people in the United States, because if you don't change their mindset and realize that we're not less than, we are human beings, no matter what your great grandparents told you,
Right.
we are people. And yet we all are people. We're all human beings. One's not better than the other.
Right.
Yet
We
that's not
just,
what we've been taught, though, Anthony, right? I mean, I think we have
I
to admit
know.
that. So, like, that's not the conditioning or the inertia or the reality. And so I think it first requires us acknowledging that. And it's hard for a lot of white people to say that out loud, because there's this
Yeah.
desperation and this hunger to feel good about who I am. I want to know I am a good person, so therefore I can't possibly contribute to racism. And what we teach folks is that, like, both are true. Both can be
Yeah,
true. Like,
yes.
you be totally awesome and fantastic, and we can like all those things. And if you aren't actively working against the inertia that has been set before us for 400 years, then absolutely you're contributing to racism every
Yes.
single way.
Yes.
And like,
Wonderful.
don't get like,
Wonderful.
True.
yeah, and don't be freaking out about it. Like, just say it and then unpack it and acknowledge it. Like, don't be
Yes.
swimming around in all this guilt. I don't need you to get up. Stop all that crying. Right? And nothing to
Yeah, I
cry
love
about.
it.
And nothing to cry about. You ain't do it. You just now acknowledging it. Let's go. Now we can do the work.
I
Exactly. It's
love it.
not a blame game.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, let's just get on with it. You
Yeah.
can't do nothing about what you think or how you feel. Let's get on. Let's move forward.
Yes.
So
Let's get
thank
the
you
work
so
done.
much. Yes, you more
Thank
than answered my
you.
question, and I will hop off the stage and continue listening.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I appreciate you being here. Yeah, Nikki. I mean, that's right. It's this whole, and maybe I'm like you. You know, I remember my very first job out of college, oil and gas, because I'm a Texan, right? Oil and gas, and they had switched bosses or something. And I remember going down the hall because I was an accountant, and I was going down the hall to talk to my boss because there was something that was weird in the system, and I was trying to figure it out. And he said, "Hey," he was retiring. He said, "Hey, I've got to work with this guy. Can you go talk to the other guy who's going to be your boss?" Sure, no problem. And I remember walking down the hall, catching him in the hall, and just saying, "Hey, I've got a question about this, blah blah blah." And he was like, "I don't know why you think if he can't work with you that I have time to deal with you." I mean, in front of everybody. And I remember walking into my office, bursting into tears, right? Calling my daddy, crying. Oh my
Yeah.
God. And the phone disconnected, right? And I was like, wait. And so I called him back. I'm like, Daddy, the phone disconnected. He's like, no, it didn't. I hung up. I'm like, wait, what?
Right.
And he's like, I need you to stop all that crying. He
Yeah.
said, no. He said, that's not what we do. He said, I need you to get it together. If you're that upset, go find a bathroom, go find a closet, go find somewhere and let that out and then come back and figure it out. He said, because that's not what we do. That's not what we do. And so I remember from that experience of it's not about not being emotional, right? But it is about channeling those emotions into action. So you can be upset all you want to, but what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
What are you going
Yeah.
to do? Because emotion doesn't get me anywhere other than just more emotional, right? And so I think that's really important what you said. So as we get to the top of the hour here, Nikki, I want you to tell people a little bit more about Harper Slade, where they can find you, this fantastic thing you got going on, because I want to make sure we have that live and then in the replay. I want people to know how to get to you and to engage in this new thing you're doing.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about the new thing. So let me talk about Harper Slade first. So we, again, racial equity advisory firm. We're based in Louisville, Kentucky, but we have clients all over the world and would love to have any of you among our client cadre. We do racial equity assessments. We do sentiment surveys to help you understand what the climate is in your organization. We do lots and lots of speaking inside of organizations. We give context to strategic priorities, like strategic offsites and all employee meetings. We have training programs, one called The Garden. We have a program called In Residence with Harper Slade. That's for leadership. Oh my gosh. Just all the things that help you think about the advancement of racial equity in the workplace as an economic imperative. So that's super, super important. But the new thing that Laurel is referencing is that we are also launching a new coaching program specifically for white women. So one of the things that we've noticed is that while we're doing some really great work inside of workspaces, most of us go back home to segregation, to sameness, to familiarity and predictability. And we don't have a lot of chances at home to practice what we're learning at work around race and equity. And so it's important that we be able to practice and be what we're becoming at home. And we also know that there are a number of white women specifically out here, because white women, as you said, are really growing in our power and our potency, and we're super prolific, all the P's, and how we're showing up in all the spaces that we hold, and our workspaces at home and our community. The way women sit, the position of authority and influence is super powerful. I want to be able to work with inclined white women who are really interested in moving this work forward and becoming greater racial equity strategists at home, at work, and in community to supplement the work that we are doing inside of workspaces. So we're launching this new program called the Rare Woman Collective. RARE is an acronym. It stands for Radically Advancing Advocacy for Racial Equity. We have our kickoff conference in Louisville, Kentucky, November 2nd through 4th. So any of you all interested in that, please let us know at admin@harperslade.com. You can also reach us there for other Harper Slade work. Our website is www.harperslade.com. I also have a website, nikkilanier.com.